Here's a secret the biggest AI labs would rather not spread. You can copy a frontier model without ever touching its weights. You already have everything you need. The API you pay a few cents to use, that is the door. Ask it enough good questions. Save the answers. Train a small model on those answers. You have now copied the part that costs the money. The trick has a name: distillation. And right now, it is the most disruptive idea in AI. So, here is the plan. What distillation actually is and why the big labs use it on their own products. Then the receipts, because the numbers get genuinely hard to believe. And the honest catch, because a lot of distillation content stops right before the part that matters most. The setup is almost insultingly simple. One giant, expensive teacher model. One small, cheap student trained to behave like it. The student never sees the teacher's weights. It just studies the teacher's outputs until the behavior sticks. The idea is not new. Back in 2015, Geoffrey Hinton, Oriel Vinyals, and Jeff Dean wrote it up at Google and gave the useful leftover signal a name: dark knowledge. When a teacher model answers a question, it does not pick one word. It assigns a probability to every possible next token, a full landscape of how confident it is. Those are called soft labels. Say you show it a photo. A plain label just says cat, but the teacher might say 90% cat, 9% dog, 1% car. That 9% is the gold. It tells the student that dogs look more like cats than cars do. The student learns the shape of the teacher's judgment, the whole probability landscape, not only the answer it picked. When you can read those internal probabilities, it is called white box distillation. Rich signal, fast learning, surprisingly little data needed. There is one catch that decides everything. You can only read a model's internal probabilities if you own the model. Outside of a lab like OpenAI or Google, none of us owns the flagship. All you get is the public API, a text box that answers and nothing more. The internals stay in the vault, which is exactly where the black box version of distillation becomes the problem. In black box distillation, you see nothing inside. No weights, no probabilities. You send prompts, save the text that comes back, and train on that alone. It is a weaker signal than soft labels, but repeated across 100,000 examples, even a weak signal burns the teacher's habits into the student. A competitor behind a paywall on the far side of the planet can copy how your model behaves without touching a single one of its parameters. The front door you open for paying customers is the same door your product walks out of, which brings us to the day this stopped being a research paper, January 2025. A Chinese lab called DeepSeek, a spinoff from a quantitative hedge fund, released an open reasoning model named R1 and handed it to the world. DeepSeek said the base model behind it cost about $5.6 million in GPU rental, a fraction of what the industry assumed a model this good would need. Semi-analysis analysts put DeepSeek's all-in hardware spend north of $500 million once you count the years of failed runs, data, and salaries. So the headline deserves an asterisk. But the headline had already escaped. The next trading session, NVIDIA shed close to $600 billion in market capitalization in a single day, the largest single session loss for any company on record. Nothing had broken. Building a frontier model had just started to look cheap. Then came the accusation. OpenAI and Microsoft said they had evidence DeepSeek had trained R1 partly on ChatGPT's own outputs, textbook black box distillation, and under OpenAI's terms of use, strictly prohibited. There was a tell that was hard to wave away. Ask some of these distilled models who they were, and they would sometimes say they were ChatGPT. A student that copies the teacher too closely picks up its name. The phrasing, the formatting, the verbal tics. All of it travels with the skills. There is a rich irony worth saying out loud. OpenAI built its own models on the open web without asking the people who wrote it. Now it was furious that someone had learned from its output without asking. The whole field is standing on data it did not pay for. To be fair to DeepSeek, R1 was peer-reviewed and published in Nature, the first major language model to clear that bar. Whatever went into it, the result was real and anyone could inspect it. DeepSeek then took R1's reasoning and distilled it straight into smaller, open qwen models from Alibaba. They ran their giant reasoner as the teacher and used its answers to fine-tune pocket-sized students you can download for free. The result should not be possible on paper. DeepSeek R1 Distill qwen 32B, a 32 billion parameter model that costs nothing to download and runs on hardware you own, scored 72.6 on AIME 2024 and 94.3 on Mate 500. according to DeepSeek's own paper and confirmed on the OpenRouter model page. OpenAI's O1 Mini scored 63.6 on AIME 2024 and 90.0 on Mate 500. The free model is winning, and it scales down further than it has any right to. The 7 billion parameter version, small enough to run on a decent laptop, still clears 55% on that same brutal math exam per the DeepSeek Hugging Face model card, 1/20th the size of the teacher. Most of the capability intact. If you want to run it locally, the hardware requirements are not exotic. Per Lelm Hardware's hardware guide, the 14B distilled variant needs around 8.5 GB of VRAM. An RTX 4070 12 GB handles it. The 32B at Q4 quantization needs roughly 17.5 GB, an RTX 4090. One command in Alma, no API bill, no upload. The cost story does not stop there. Berkeley Sky T1 matched OpenAI's O1 preview on reasoning benchmarks, and the entire training run cost under $450. Same recipe, OpenQwen base, reasoning traces from another open model, fine-tune. Then Stanford and the University of Washington took it further with a number I had to read twice. A model called S1 matched cutting-edge reasoning benchmarks for under $50. Roughly 1,000 carefully chosen questions answered by Google's Gemini, used to fine-tune an OpenQwen model under 30 minutes of training on 16 GPUs. That is the whole project. The trick that pushed it over the line was almost silly. When the small model tried to stop reasoning early, the researchers appended a single word, wait. It reconsidered. A one-word prompt stacked on a $50 distill, reaching toward the frontier. The lead researcher noted that at current cloud prices, the compute to reproduce it runs about $20. Hold those two numbers next to each other. On one side, a training run approaching $1 billion. Anthropic CEO Dario Amodei has said publicly that the models being built right now cost on the order of $1 billion each, and that $10 billion runs are only a couple of years away. On the other side, a free qwen model, $20 of rented compute, and a one-word hack. One is a national scale project. The other fits on a coffee receipt. The gap between teacher and student is real, and it grows in specific ways. On AIME 2024, the full R1 teacher scores 79.8. The 32B student scores 72.6, a 7-point gap. Real. A June 2025 study cited an analysis from Yage AI found the distilled R1 scored 14.7% lower than the qwen base on medical tasks. Mathematical reasoning frameworks come through. Domain-specific clinical pattern recognition stays with the teacher. The student picked up the problem-solving moves. 20 years of hospital rounds remained behind. There is also a brittleness problem. The same analysis found distilled models can drop 6 to 14 percentage points in accuracy when a problem's phrasing is altered slightly. That is the signature of memorization. The student absorbed the pattern of the answers, and the underlying principle that generated them stayed with the teacher. And the ceiling is real. The student cannot exceed the teacher. Full reinforcement learning, the path DeepSeek used to build R1, produces cross-domain generalization, gains in math that transfer spontaneously into code. Distillation gives you a copy of the teacher's ceiling. That ceiling belongs to someone else. Black box distillation against models you do not own carries real legal risk. OpenAI, Anthropic, and Google all have terms of service that explicitly prohibit using their outputs to train competing models. Anthropic went public in early 2025 with something stark. It had detected 3 Chinese labs, DeepSeek, Moonshot AI, and Minimax, running organized extraction campaigns against its Claude models. More than 16 million harvesting conversations funneled through roughly 24,000 fake accounts. A single proxy was steering 20,000 fake accounts at once. One common technique? Ask the model to write out its full step-by-step reasoning, then harvest the chain of thought as training data. The teacher patiently explains its work, and the student copies the homework. An industrial-scale extraction operation. The labs are building defenses in response. Behavioral fingerprints, classifiers that flag reasoning harvesting prompts, hard identity checks before you can reach the strongest models. On sites you do not own, you are one terms of service clause away from legal exposure. Step back from the benchmarks and look at what the cost numbers actually describe. You can spend $1 billion teaching a machine to reason. The reasoning, it turns out, is far easier to copy than it is to keep. That is the fight the whole industry is waking up to. Distillation is the reason the model behind the curtain is no longer the moat the labs thought they paid for. Every query through the API is a lesson. Every lesson is a data point. The product and the liability are the same door. If this reframed what a frontier AI is actually worth, and who can afford to copy one, subscribe. This is where we take the hype apart and show you the receipts underneath. I'll see you in the next one.